Hey everybody, I'm gonna grab a seat or run if now you want to run. My name is Rebecca Fernandez. I work at Red Hat. I am the principal program manager for what we call our Scaling Our Open Organization program. So that is, how do we scale the open parts of our culture that are really important to us as we grow? Because it's not so easy to be open and transparent and inclusive and iterative with 13,000 plus people. So figuring out what do we want to look like as we grow? How do we want to work with each other? That's a big part of what I do. And it's kind of an interesting role to have because you can't really mandate anything. I mean, everybody that works at Red Hat will tell you you can't mandate anything, but I really can't mandate anything. I have to convince people because otherwise they're just going to say, no, what do you know? So I think that gives me an interesting perspective maybe to share with y'all. If you're looking at how do you scale the culture that you're trying to build inside your own team to your stakeholders, if you're looking for how do I shift a culture inside my team, how do I influence others to think in more agile ways. I think you'll find some helpful stuff here. Spoiler alert, maybe the keys might have something to do with what we call open leadership. That might have something to do with it. So we'll talk about that. All right, agenda. Look at this. They have this like 79-inch monitor back here for us. It's awesome. I don't have to squint anymore. So we're going to talk about what is open leadership. When we talk about open leadership, what's the difference between leadership anywhere and open leadership? What are the stages of it? So as you develop this capability, what does it look like? How do you grow and transform? What kind of mindset do you need to be an open leader? Because it's not about behaviors so much as it is the way you think. But then what behaviors flow from thinking in that way? So what are the important behaviors? Well, the ones that we know about anyway. And then we'll wrap up. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I'll manage our time throughout, and I'll try to also leave some time for questions at the end, because I know even when I say that, there's always somebody who has a question and won't ask it until I'm done. So try to do both. All right, so what is open leadership? A couple things, right? Just like anything, it's developed in stages. We'll talk about that. It is a set of behaviors and mindsets. It's not a role. So it has nothing to do with what your title is. I think sometimes that's the difference between the way we think about leadership in more conventional ways. Some people think about leadership that way anyway, but not a role. It's basically your ability to make an impact through influencing others. So rather than using your title, your position, rather than forcing people into doing something, using your authority, how do you influence them to come around? And so it's accessible to everybody. That's why we named the talk what we did, right? It's an invitation to everybody. And I would argue that even when you have the position, the authority, the power, it's actually a more effective way to lead. Because if you can convince somebody that what you want them to do is actually the best course of action, they're going to move forward in a much more effective, much happier way. All right, so first stage, I think the most important thing to understand is what is the difference between, at the most foundational level, conventional forms of leadership and open leadership. So most people would say, okay, personal leadership is a classic first development stage of any kind of leadership, right? You have to be a personal leader. Most definitions of that would say, look, bring your best self, right? Bring your expertise, know your stuff, be good at what you do. Be self-directed, be motivated, right? Don't wait for somebody to tell you what to do. Take initiative, take action. Take responsibility as an individual, right? That's pretty standard. You want to say, what does personal leadership look like? It looks like those things. So open leadership is all of those things, plus a little bit more. It's beginning to contribute together with others. And so what I mean by that is not just bringing your best self, but actually bringing out the best in others, in the people you work with. It's drawing upon others' expertise. So it's not just being an expert, it's being able to pull in other experts as needed. It's gathering input and feedback, right? So seeking that information from other people as part of the way that you work, as a matter of course. Influencing other people to participate, so getting them engaged in whatever it is you're doing, bringing them in. And ultimately, it's taking responsibility and initiative, not just as an individual, but for working as a member of a community, right? It's thinking about the whole, thinking about the collective, realizing that the work you do is part of something bigger. So if some of this stuff sounds familiar, if it sounds like, yeah, this is the kind of stuff I have to do every day, because we see a lot of parallels between what we think of as open leadership and the kinds of skills you need in an agile DevOps kind of environment, right? Generally, you don't have that much authority to tell everybody what to do. So it's figuring out, how do I influence them and work with them? How do I bring all these people together and get them to work together? All right, fun little graph that I made, and it made sense when I made it. It may not make sense now. There's a formula in here. My boss, Jan Smith, came up with this a long time ago. So it's I equals Y, and then there's this sort of N variable, right? She's an engineer, if you can't tell. So I is impact. So I is, what is the impact you make? Y is you. N is the number of people who impact other people because of your influence. So at that personal leadership stage that we talked about, you're contributing with others. Your impact is you plus the N number of people who you are able to influence to work with you. Now, one important note is when you're new to a role, right, you're new to an organization, you're in a new setting, you actually are not usually even able to contribute independently yet. So you're starting in open leadership, you're starting at one stage above contributing independently, right? When you're first new in that role, it doesn't matter what kind of environment you're part of, you are dependent on others to contribute, and your ability to contribute is actually kind of divided by how many people have to help you, right? The impact you make, you need a lot of people's help. I feel like her formula is wrong on this, but I'll get back to that. All right, so once you get beyond the personal leadership thing, then you move into team leadership. And again, this is not about a role, this is about the way that you work. So what a team leader can do, what somebody who can lead a team of people can do, is they contribute through others, right? So first you contribute with others, now you begin to contribute through others. So you influence people in such a way that they are a little bit more involved in what they do. They can make a greater impact. And all of those impacts together create something bigger than you could have done on your own. So think about, great, you've got this group of people, you've enabled all of them to be personal leaders, right? You've helped create this environment where they are all taking initiative, not just for themselves, but taking initiative for working together. Starting to sound familiar what this looks like? Okay, so great, get to that team leadership stage. Now this is where it gets really, really interesting and really tough. The development beyond this point is what we think of as organizational leadership. So that is where you are really contributing exponentially. Your impact isn't just what you can do, and it isn't just what people who you influence can do, it's what entire groups of people who you influence can do together. So we don't all need to impact at that level, right? We may not need our influence to be that large. In the beginning, a lot of what most of us need to be able to do is kind of at the team level. But the bigger and more successful your adventures become, right? The bigger what you're trying to achieve is, the more teams within an organization who you need to be thinking in an agile way are. That's where some of this organizational leadership becomes really valuable. And it takes time to get there, right? You might have that capability, but you potentially are going to have to build a number of other people who can help support that. If you look up here and you've got like bubbles inside of bubbles inside of bubbles, it doesn't just happen overnight, right? There's development that happens within you and development that happens within the people you work within. All right, let's go down to the personal level, because this is where I think most of us have to operate every day. If we don't have this stuff down, the rest of it's a little bit hard to achieve. So I think there are three main areas where I see there's a really good opportunity to demonstrate open leadership. The one scenario is you want to influence someone's behavior, right? Maybe the way that they're behaving is not real helpful. You need them to change. Whatever, it could be interpersonal, could be the way that they work every day, right? Could be the processes they follow or don't follow, it could be anything. Second scenario that I think this becomes really important is you want to fix something, and you can't just fix it on your own. You need other people's help, their buy-in, their support to fix it. Personal leadership, really helpful there. The third one is you've got an idea you want to make happen, and again, you can't do it by yourself. It requires buy-in and cooperation from other people. So three common scenarios. I want you to think about in the role that you're in every day. Think of a scenario that's one of these things where you feel kind of stuck today. You know that it needs to happen. You can't actually get it to move forward. I'm going to give you a minute to think about it because it's going to be useful the rest of our talk. All right, so everybody got something? Good. All right, so then we move into the idea of mindsets and behaviors, right? So I want you to keep coming back to the scenario you just thought of. Where would this stuff be helpful? So ultimately, what leadership comes to life as is, what is the mindset I have and what behaviors flow from that? So when it comes to open leadership, think of this as, what is an open leader's mindset like? When I say mindset, what I mean by that is kind of an entrenched way of thinking, right? It's a set of patterns, a set of beliefs, a way of thinking that comes out when you're under stress, a way of thinking that you default to in most situations. Now, sometimes we'll fall out of it, right? When we're really, really tested, sometimes we will fall away from it, but it's what we come back to because it's what we believe. So when we think about open leadership, the foundational mindset under this is the idea of defaulting to open, that belief that open is a better way to do things. And when I say open, I mean a lot of different things. I mean transparency, right? Openly sharing information. I mean inclusion, being open to including other perspectives. I mean meritocracy. I mean being open to ideas that are good no matter who they come from, not valuing the person who gives you the idea more than the idea itself, really judging things on their merits. I mean participation, right? Collaboration, being open to input from other sides. I mean adaptability. So being open to changing your mind, to adapting as you learn new things, right? So all of those different concepts of open, defaulting to those things, believing fundamentally that doing things in that way is a better way of working. It's not always faster, not always easier, but it gets you to a better outcome. So that's the mindset that really underlays all of this. And it comes to life in a couple different ways. So one way I think about it is an inclusive mindset. So that is a belief that everybody has something special to contribute. Now, they may not always have to contribute what they think they have to contribute, right? They may not be the expert in the area they believe they are, but they have a perspective that if you can draw it out, would make things more valuable, would make things better. And what a leader does actually is begin to really see that. What is that unique thing that this person contributes? Especially when that person is very different from you or very difficult. Second mindset is growth mindset. So that is the belief that everybody has untapped potential, that the way that somebody is today is not necessarily who they will be 5 years from now. And so this, if you've ever read anything by like Carol Dweck, right, this is pretty common stuff. The difference that they usually draw is the growth mindset and there's a fixed mindset. The growth mindset is, I believe that things are changeable and can move. Put that down because I talk with my hands. The third one is I haven't loved the name of this. We're still fiddling with it. We think of it as an opt-in mindset. So that is believing that everybody has a responsibility to lead at certain times. Leadership isn't something that people get to opt out of. It's believing that no matter what your role is, whether you're a people manager, a team lead, or you're an individual contributor, right? Nobody officially reports to you, that you have moments when you need to lead, and you have moments when you need to step back and let someone else lead. And the fourth one is what we think of as an enterprise mindset. And again, we always change the words every time we come up with these models, but the thinking here is that everybody benefits when we all put the collective first. We all put the organization first, right? And everybody knows this, right? If you have worked with somebody who is a very siloed thinker, if you've worked with somebody who's very us versus them, who's very me first, my team first, our budget, our priorities, yours don't matter, that is never a productive environment, right? But the difference here is this mindset says, I believe that even when I work in that environment, even when I work with people like that if I behave differently, if I put the organization first, that I can shift how other people respond. So it's a big leap for a lot of us. And I will say all of these mindsets, there are things we have to actively work on, right? There are times when you'll notice, especially when you're under stress, probably in the situation where you feel stuck today, you'll notice yourself falling away from these, right? These are mindsets that are mindsets of abundancy. They're mindsets of the belief that there are opportunities for everybody, that there's enough for everybody. And that's not easy to believe when the surface evidence seems contrary. All right, so from mindsets, then flow behaviors, right? What I believe, what I think, often dictates how I behave. So we did a project, gosh, it's been many years now, 6 years ago, I think. We said, hey, Red Hatters all across the company, when you look at people inside the company who are really effective, influential leaders, regardless of what their title is, right? Regardless of how many people report to them on an org chart, when you look at people who are truly effective leaders inside of Red Hat, what do they do that effective leaders in any company, anywhere else, don't have to do to be effective? What are those behaviors that are differentiating, right? That inside of a culture that's very open, very agile, very transparent, very inclusive, what sets these people apart and gets people to listen to them? Because that's one thing we picked up on inside Red Hat is that it doesn't matter all that much what your title is. People will pay more attention to you, right? They'll probably scrutinize you a little bit more if you have a director in your title or a VP or something like that. But they're not necessarily going to do what you want them to do, not necessarily going to buy into it. Jim has all kinds of stories, our CEO, about this. You know, his first week at Red Hat, he said, hey, you know, all my direct reports, I need you to come up with this report. I need you to do this. And he said, and, you know, I thought they all went off their own way and did it. And he said, about a week or two later, I came back and I said, hey, you know, where's that report I asked for? And they said, well, we got together afterward and talked. We didn't think it was a good idea, so we just didn't do it. Very typical inside Red Hat, right? It doesn't always play out exactly that way, but I think it's typical in a lot of organizations. If people don't buy into what it is you want them to do, they find some way to not do it, right? They find some way to opt out of it, no matter what controls you put in place. Just a question of, do they do it openly or do they do it, subversively? So anyway, the behaviors that floated to the top for us at Red Hat. First one was connect. Great leaders inside Red Hat are able to contribute and connect others to Red Hat's purpose, our mission. Why are we here? They're able to draw a connection between what am I asking you to do, what am I trying to influence you to change, and the bigger picture. Why should it matter to you? Why does it matter to the company? And you can kind of hear that enterprise mindset in there, right? It permeates the way they speak. The way they speak is it's not about what's best for our team. It's about what's best for everybody in aggregate. There are always going to be some winners and some losers, but long term, why should we all buy into this? Why do we care? Second behavior is they extend trust. So they show confidence in other people's ability to contribute. And this one is really important because if you think about, you ever had the experience where you've worked with somebody and you knew they did not trust you? How much did you trust them? Yeah, not very much. How much did you want to give extra effort or do them any favors at all? Yeah. So if you don't extend trust to other people, they don't want to work with you. They're not going to do very much for you. And yet, our company is a place full of perfectionists who don't trust each other. That is the peril of hiring really high-performing people. It's hard for them to trust other people. Their experiences told them in the past, nobody knows anything as much as you do. But guess what? That's not really the case. So that's something that a lot of us have to work on, myself included. How do you extend trust to others, and how do you set them up to be able to do something effectively? So it's a valuable behavior. It's not an easy one. If you saw that one and thought, not so good, just know you're not alone. The third behavior is be transparent. So they openly share information that contributes to other people's understanding of decisions. They openly share what their intentions are. There's an interesting thing that happens with humans, especially if you want them to change something, you're kind of tinkering with something that they think is working okay. When you don't talk about what the intentions are for doing that, when you're not clear about here's what I am trying to do and here's what I'm not trying to do, people fill in the blanks, right? They make up their own stories about what's really going on here. And so even when it's an obvious to you reason, right? Of course we would do this. Why wouldn't we do this? Of course this is not to eliminate your job, right? Even when it seems really obvious, just stating that, here's what we're not talking about, here's what this is not about, actually makes a really big difference in showing that you trust people and letting them trust you. Fourth one is they collaborate. So really effective leaders in an open environment are very collaborative. They invite cooperation. They invite productive dialogue and even productive disagreement, right? They bring more people in to work together to get to better solutions. And that collaboration, it's not always friendly. It's not always nice, right? There can be a very high degree of creative friction in that process. But they are not an island. They don't assume that it's up to them to come up with the right answer and deliver it to everybody else. It's a much more collaborative process. The last one, which is a little bit of a mouthful, they promote inclusive meritocracy. So what we mean by that is they empower other people to contribute their ideas to help create better solutions. And what they value is the solution, is the idea on the basis of its merit, not on who gave it to them. And I think I talked about that some already. But that becomes really important because if you can create that kind of environment that says, look, I don't care what your title is, if you come and you have a good idea for how to make this better, I'm going to be open to that. I'm going to try to help you drive it forward. That makes a big difference. You get the best out of people. And I will say meritocracy is kind of a flawed concept. There's a lot of research on this. And if you want to dig more into it, I would suggest looking at Stanford University has a Clayman Institute for Gender Research. But what they've found when they look at this is that there's a little bit of a meritocracy paradox. So organizations and teams who believe themselves to be very meritocratic, when you actually look at how they make decisions and you look at the decisions they make, objectively speaking, they are less meritocratic than organizations who don't hold that belief about themselves. So that's the paradox of meritocracy is we are humans, we are biased in many different ways, and we look for things that confirm what we already believe, even when we don't know we're doing it. And we are all subject to that. So an idea that comes from someone who fits the mold of what I think a great person in this role would look like, I'm more likely to overvalue their idea, even though I don't recognize I'm doing it. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what my personal characteristics are. I live in the same culture that the rest of us live in. I'm going to be subject to those kinds of biases. So if you want to promote meritocracy, if you want to have an environment like that, which I think is a great ideal to strive for, right? We all believe that you should be able to contribute no matter who you are. If you want that environment to exist, you kind of have to continually question how well you're doing at it. You have to be open to the idea that your biases are working against you on it. And you have to be able to say, okay, how do I actually think I'm doing on this? Where am I falling down? What am I not seeing? Right? Because that's the thing about blind spots that we have. We don't know we have them. And I'll say too, even if you go outside of like the sort of diversity aspect of meritocracy, which is a little problematic, it's also really tough to do when you have entrenched beliefs about somebody, right? So when you work with somebody and you don't really get on that well with them, you don't have a lot of respect for them, generally the ideas they bring you, you're going to be more resistant to. And guess what? They probably know that. We all pick up on it. We know when we're the target of it, but somehow when we're the person who does it, we think we hide it so well. Those kind of things get in the way. That's where you start to have arguments that aren't even about what you're actually talking about. They're about, do you respect me? Do I respect you? I think we don't, right? That's what a lot of those arguments are about. We might fixate on the technical details, but it's not really what it's about. All right, look at that. Everybody was so quiet during it. We got to Q&A with a lot of time to spare. So what questions do you have when you think about this stuff? What are you grappling with? In the back. Who has the mic? Go for it.
How are you measuring how open the leadership is within Red Hat?
Can you repeat the question?
How are you measuring how open the leadership is within Red Hat?
That's a good question. So we have some measures we look at. We have an associate survey that goes out every year. It's pretty good participation amount. I think 75% or so of Red Hatters take it. And we ask questions. So for example, how well do you feel that Red Hat's leaders do on transparency? Do you feel that people consider the impact of their decisions on you? There are some limitations, though. I've never quite been able to get them to put a could you name names box in there for obvious reasons. So when you look at the comments, sometimes you can draw general trends. Okay, we have some issues within this team or this organization because people are mad enough to put it in there if it's not going well, or they're happy enough with how it's going to say like, yeah, I think the IT team does great or whatever. But that is definitely one area we look at. And then the other thing we look at too is so we kind of benefit from having a pretty open environment where people can speak out if they don't feel how things are going very well. So we try to keep an eye on that too, kind of when decisions are being made or projects are launching, what's the general feedback we get? Do people question how well we did? Do they feel like we did a pretty good job? And that's tough because it has a bias toward negativity. People are more likely, in Red Hat at least, to speak out negatively than positively about something, but generally at least gives you a sense of where the pulse is. Question in the front.
Hey, thanks, Rebecca. Really interesting things to think about in terms of open leadership. Question about transparency, and you may have said the term, but working out loud. How do you encourage in groups, in teams, in individual people at Red Hat to actually not just go to their workstation or their desk and kind of bury themselves in a project, but actually kind of share their progress, share with their team, and like really get that real collaboration in real time outside of meetings, right? Not let's just get everybody in a room and have a meeting, but actually working collaboratively.
So I'll say I see a lot of different tactics inside the company for how people do this. Some of them, because they're already working on open source software development, there tends to be a bit of a default to publishing what you're working on. So things like your bug reports being publicly visible, and people kind of nag at you if you don't give them an update. So some of that helps. And I do think there is a lot of kind of intuitive process that holds some of these things in place. So we're not necessarily like well designing them. They just happen. We'll see for how long. But a couple different things. So another one is there is a very strong expectation organizationally that if you're working on something, you will give people updates on how it's going. So that tends to really dictate a lot of, to the earlier question, kind of how do you measure how well you're doing with the openness? If you start to get a lot of those complaints about, hey, I gave input on this and I never heard anything, or I thought somebody was working on this and it's been silent for 3 months, generally that is kind of an informal mechanism that seems to work pretty well. For the most part, though, what I observe is people who you work with every day will remind you sometimes, whether it's your manager or your peers or somebody who you ask for input, you'll run into them and they will say like, hey, what's going on with that? Now we are still, I will say, we're pretty meeting dependent. We're pretty email dependent, very email dependent. We do have things like project pages where people will update things, but generally it's kind of a pick your tool, pick how you want to do it. And there are strengths to that. It means it's easier for people to make their work transparent. And there are downsides to that. It means when you're trying to find out what's going on, you might have to go to many different kind of channels to get it. Oh, hang on, Mike. To wait for the mic.
Thanks. And just a follow up then, have you tried to measure it, right? So you kind of mentioned latency or delay between requests for help or status on something. There's like plugins for Slack and there's different things you can do, different apps out there, I'm sure, to kind of measure the connectedness of your organization. Have you guys attempted to do that at all?
So I think that question seems to kind of assume a certain level of standards that don't really exist inside Red Hat. I would say that within certain organizations, you would probably find some things like that, but we don't even have a standardized chat tool. We have 17 of them. So, it's kind of a chaotic environment sometimes. I will say there are definitely, I've seen things like within Bugzilla or Trello, Jira, everybody uses their own tools, but there do seem to be some sort of makeshift ways people do it. It's not like one universal way. I wish I had better suggestions on that. But an interesting person to talk to if you're able to connect with her, she's definitely on Twitter, is Jen Krieger. I know that she specifically has done a lot to figure out how do we make things more transparent within our groups, and RJ in the back also may have some insights to share on that front. Other questions?
Hi. As an open leader, how do you deal with situations where you can't be transparent because of legal reasons, or like you're doing mergers and acquisitions, something like that, and work needs to be done related to that specific thing? We can't be just say, okay, we're going to acquire X company. That's why I'm asking you to print out these reports. And that could create a lot of issues for you.
Yeah, so that's kind of our age-old dilemma. Some of them are easy. So like mergers and acquisitions, that is an easy one. Because I can tell you, I would have told you, but somebody probably would have gone to jail. So bad idea, right? I got an easy answer to that one. But there are a lot of them that are grayer, right? Sometimes somebody made a decision and it wasn't the best decision and we're trying to recover from it, but we don't necessarily want to like broadcast, hey, this person made a really bad choice, right? There are times when, people will want more transparency about why did this team move over here or why did somebody leave the company? And I think the most important thing to recognize is those situations exist all the time where confidentiality is important, where privacy is an issue, and people don't always know that those issues exist. So we used to struggle with this a lot. I technically sit inside the HR team at Red Hat. And we often found that situations that to us, it just seemed really obvious. Like, no, we're not going to tell you when somebody's, being investigated by HR for violating something, right? We're not going to tell the whole company that. Things that seem really obvious to you and you're part of the company, they're actually not obvious to everybody. There are people who have no idea that, no, that's not something that legally you could ever do. So I think stating the obvious, there's something we're working on, it's confidential, or maybe after the fact, we were working on this. Here's why I asked you to produce that one report. I couldn't tell you at the time for these reasons, but here's one of the factors that were at play. In general, we also try to give general principles. So I try to have, for example, a list of what are common scenarios where we can't be as transparent as we might like to be. What are common reasons why, for example, when your manager moves on to a new role, I may not be able to give you specifics about why any manager in the company moves on to a new role, right? I can give you the general reasons. It could be for any number of reasons on this list, right? And as soon as I show you the reasons on that list, it's pretty evident to you, oh, right. So if you told me for one manager and not for another, it might be clear that, this one was in trouble and that one wasn't. But I think in general, the more you can explain, here's why I can't tell you, or here's why in this type of situation I can't get into the specifics. I would if I could. These are the constraints. People generally seem to respect that, but we also don't know what we don't know. Saw the mic moved over here.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. With regards to the art of influence without authority, as you bring in people from all these diverse backgrounds and corporate settings, how do you inculcate, how do you go ahead and mentor the next generation of people influencing without authority?
Well, I think in part they see what works and what doesn't. At least some of them do. Some of them don't. Some of them will persist with tactics that don't work too well. Good question. I mean, there certainly is a lot that happens within teams. You know, when somebody sees somebody on their team and they are approaching something in a way that is clearly not going to get them what they want, I feel like most people who have been around Red Hat for a while are inclined to say like, hey, let's talk about what are you actually trying to achieve here, and is what you're doing going to get you there? And I find that often when you have that conversation with people, then they're much more receptive to, okay, well, if I didn't do that, what could I do differently? But it's very relationship oriented inside Red Hat. I mean, we certainly have more broader things we do. So there are trainings and things that we offer. We have an influence class. We have a class we do that's a Franklin Covey class, I think, called Crucial Conversations is a really good one. But helping people draw the connection between here's a training that's available and here's what you're actually trying to do in your career sometimes is a little bit challenging. But I think one nice thing about being such an open environment where conversations do happen in front of the entire company sometimes on our mailing lists, you start to pick up on, oh, hey, this person went about it in that way, and clearly that was not real effective. So what might we do differently next time? But I don't know. Not everybody learns by observation either, I'll tell you that.
Hey, so quick question. I was at Red Hat a while ago, 3 years, 5 years, something like that. And I've heard it's becoming more distributed. And so how do you build things like extend trust and be open and build relationships, what you just said, with distributed teams?
Yeah, so it does start to break down really easily. The less face-to-face encounters you have with somebody, the easier it is to kind of caricaturize them, see them in a different way, assume they don't understand you. So I think one thing we use, which you probably remember we used back then too, we use video conferencing quite a bit. So Blue Jeans is the system we're currently using. But having meetings when it's a global meeting with a small team, having those face-to-face, so to speak, seems to make a big difference. Certainly teams do try to put some money into getting together all together if they can, if it's a small group, but they're distributed. Some of the larger ones too, I've noticed some of the leaders seem to be working more to kind of humanize themselves. So being willing to share more about kind of how did they end up in the role they're in, stories from their past. I see that what I notice happening much more often is that the person in charge of a large organization starts to seem less connected to the people who they work with every day. And so I think that's one thing that can be really helpful there. And then a lot of it too is, we're pretty interconnected through whatever chat system that program uses, IRC or whatever. They do tend to stay pretty connected through those means too. I don't know, it's definitely a challenge, but I do think the video conferencing helps a lot.
So I've worked with an executive team that has a very sincere desire to make a transformation to adaptive methods for development. But most of them have also gotten to where they are through 20 or 30 years of very much command and control behaviors. And they're not trying to undermine their own good intentions, and yet they do. So for middle manager leaders, say, what things can one do to help nudge them in sort of more constructive directions that would actually help foster the transformation?
Yes, I guess the first thing I'd say is tread very lightly. But I think one thing that's helpful is helping them see the connection between the way that they're behaving and what is happening as a result and what they actually want to happen. So it's really not that different than what I was talking about earlier, the idea of here's what you want is what you're doing getting you there. It's definitely a conversation. We have that inside Red Hat a lot. I've had that with people all the way at the top of our company. They're probably more receptive to it than the average leader, but I think so I'm trying to think, if I was going to plan like one thing I might do, what I might do is try to get them together and say, we're all bought into this idea that we want to make this transformation to how we work. Why? Right? So kind of get them started with why do we want to move in that direction? And then I would say, okay, in the day-to-day, how we actually do this, what are the challenges for you as a leader? What are the behaviors that you need to do less of for that to actually be effective? And what are you giving up when you do less of that, right? So really have them acknowledge that if I shift, for example, give me a behavior they need to shift, but right. So if I if we are committing that we're saying we should probably stop doing that, we should probably stop telling customers, yes, you can have that feature without talking to the product team. What in the moment am I giving up when I do that as a leader? What is going to be that thing I'm giving up that's actually going to be really tough to give up? And I think listening to that conversation, right? I think what we'll find, so it's interesting, I heard what I give up is control. But I bet if you ask the leader, what they would say is, I give up the ability to satisfy my customer in the minute. I give up the ability to know that we're walking away from this and they still want to be with our company. They still want to buy our services. And so talking about, okay, so that means giving up some piece of that, at least in the way you've been doing it today. How do we account for that? What can we do instead in those moments that's going to give you what you need to feel like you're leading the company in the direction you need to lead it, and you're satisfying the needs of our customers, and that we actually can deliver on it? Because, what's the other impact of if we commit to something we can't deliver on time? What happens, right? So really kind of walking them through, instead of saying like, I'm trying to influence you to change, get them bought into, why do we want to do this in the first place? What is the impact if we continue to work in the way we're working as opposed to the way we want to work? What does that do for us, right? And I think, especially with senior leaders, people who are further at the top, one thing I find with those folks is the more you push, the more resistant they are. It doesn't matter how open they are. They're just in the habit, to some extent, to having people say yes, to having people go along with what they want, right? But if you can get them to acknowledge what the risks are without any pressure from you, if you can get them to own, so if we go down this path, here's the set of risks we're accepting. If we go down this path, here's the set of risks we're accepting. If you get them to own that and just sort of sit with it, they often do what you want them to do anyway. They're like, oh no, we can't continue down this path. It's not getting us where we want to get to, right? But you got to trust, right? Extend the trust that they can see where you want to go, that you've done enough groundwork to get them to where they want to be. And then when they choose to step into that, when they say, here's what I'm going to do differently instead in that moment, that's when you know you won. Next one in the back. Christian, hi.
Hey. I have a kind of long-winded question.
Go for it.
When we're talking about scaling open culture, just using here as an example, though, how do you balance finding a concrete decision when you're leveraging something like the open decision framework, which maybe you might need to explain what that is for those that aren't Red Hatters? Taking in 14,000 voices and opinions against something that when there needs to be a concrete decision made. That makes sense.
Good question. It does. I feel like I should pull up a chair. We should have a therapy session. So the open decision framework is Red Hat's internal collection of our own best practices. How do you make decisions in a way that's transparent, inclusive, participative, and actually gets the decision made and gets you to the right decision? And so it's available on GitHub. If you're interested, you can download it for free and see if it'll work for you. You can adapt it. It's Creative Commons licensed. But we had a good example of this. So one project we're in the middle of right now is redesigning Red Hat's logo. And you go out and you ask 10, 12, 13,000 Red Hatters, hey, what are your opinions about the logo today? What do you think about these potential new designs? And you get a lot of opinions. And they're not all based in technical knowledge about logo design, right? They're based in, what do I know of the logo today? They're based in, how does this new one make me feel? What feeling does this one evoke in me? What attachment do I have to the way things are, right? And so trying to wade through that 10,000, because people comment more than once and they have very strong opinions, it can feel very paralyzing. How do you get unstuck, right? And I think we've all had that experience. If you ask for a lot of feedback and it's something people care about, all of a sudden you're overwhelmed. You have no idea, what do I do with all this? What do I do with the fact I can't make everybody happy? What do I do with the fact that people are telling me things that are conflicting? Right? You say you want this, they say they want that, and I can make sense of both your arguments, but I can't do both of those things. So what do I do with that, right? I think there are actually some tips in the open decision framework on how to handle some of that might be helpful. But I think the biggest thing is really starting with, okay, what is the purpose of this? And what do I know going into it that are pretty clear constraints? What do I know that needs to happen? Absolutely. And then what are the assumptions I'm making? And you can kind of check what you hear against those things. You might find out, most of us do, that at least one of the assumptions you're making isn't quite right. it's missing something, right? It's missing somebody's perspective. And so some of the feedback you hear might get you to shift some of your assumptions. Some of it might get you to question, the problem I set out to solve, did I actually understand the problem I set out to solve? I thought I did when I went into this, but now I'm not so sure. And I think that's okay to have that moment of like, I'm a little overwhelmed by everything I'm hearing and I'm not sure what to do next. I think some of it is you start to then try to categorize, right? You start to break it down. Okay, so some of it falls into this team over here is really impacted by the way we do things today, not working for them, causes a number of problems. They also have tangential feedback related to something I can't fix, right? Because that's what you're going to get when you ask anybody for input is here's what I think about your thing and also these 30 other things that you have nothing to do with. That's okay. You just kind of sort your way through it all and start to figure it out. But I think at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what is my purpose in this? What am I trying to do? Why did I set out on this? Why do I want to solve this problem? And is that reason still the same based on everything I've heard? Does it need to shift a little bit? But once you can get a very clear, here is what the problem is we're trying to solve, here's what the constraints are, here are the people who need to be involved, here are the people who maybe are most impacted, right? They probably should have a pretty big voice in it. Here are the people who I absolutely need buy-in from to get this to execute. They probably should have a pretty big voice in it. You can start to figure out, okay, which voices, everybody gets a voice. Who actually gets a vote in this? Who gets a stronger opinion? Who gets to have more say in where we head? It's always going to be messy. It's never going to be easy. The thing I kind of encourage folks to keep in mind is when you go about a decision in any other way, you go about it in, I know the right answer, I'm just going to push it forward. That too tends to be pretty messy, right? The aftermath of that tends to be the messy part. So you can get to that decision really quickly. You can get into, we're going to execute mode, and then it all starts to fall apart, right? Because you find out maybe the problem I thought we were solving wasn't quite right. Maybe some of my assumptions are off. Maybe I missed a group of people who I don't have the buy-in I need to actually move this forward. So I wish I had we have the magic answer to this. We only have best practices. And we try to update them as we learn new things. I'm about to do a pretty big update to the open decision framework with some things we've learned because we wrote it when we had 5,000 people. Now we're at 12 plus. So you discover a few best practices since then. You discover a few things that work at 5,000 that don't work so well at 12,000. But I don't know. It's always a work in progress. Other questions? Let's see if the mic vanished. I'll raise you.
Is this model being used in a performance management or human capital management process at Red Hat for both individuals and managers or leaders in the organization? Well, no. So I don't know your performance management process goals and objectives, but if one exists, does this get applied to it? Is it available for individuals? I mean, you start with the personal leadership model, and it builds to the community, and it builds up the organization. So.
Gosh, sorry, I got down the related path. Yes. So our performance and development process uses that thing I called the Red Hat multiplier. So we actually named that the Red Hat multiplier because we noticed when people exhibit these behaviors, their impact is multiplied inside the company, right? They're able to achieve more than they otherwise could. So that's one of the things, those 5 behaviors, when we are measuring people and when they're assessing themselves, that's one of the things we look at is, how are they doing with those? And we have different, I showed you like a very simplified version of this. There's actually like a proficiency model, but it sits behind it. So at different stages of each of these behaviors, what does it look like? So our performance and development system tends to be focused more on development than on past performance. We talk about that, but most of our energy is in where do you need to develop to get to where we need you to get to, right? Where do you need to go? And so that's the part that we tend to use it more as a diagnostic, kind of, okay, maybe some of where you're struggling is because you're a little bit behind in this area, or maybe you have a lot of capability in extending trust that you could be using more than you are today, right? Maybe you're great at that, and the current role that you're in, you're not fully deploying it. So we use it a little bit in that way too. Did that answer the question? In the back?
How do you handle a situation where someone pays lip service to all this, but never actually seems to reconsider their assumptions or anything like that?
The worst. Yeah, you do run into that sometimes. Sometimes people will sort of use it for air cover instead of actually authentically living it. Generally, inside Red Hat, people question you pretty closely about things like that. I don't know. So what I encounter much more often than somebody pretending to do it is somebody who's resistant to it because they feel like, I already know what we need to do. Why would I go about sort of the sham of asking other people their opinion, right? And their perspective on it is that's not respectful to anybody to, say, I know what we're going to do, but I'll pretend I don't and ask you your opinion, right? So what I tend to encourage folks like that to do, and it's probably how I would approach that scenario too, is I will say, look, you can be honest about the fact you think you know what the right answer is. You can go into this conversation saying, I have a set of assumptions and a belief about where I think this is going to head. In fact, I'm like 95% sure right now that this is probably where we're going to land. I'm asking you for your thoughts. I'm asking you for your perspective because there's the possibility, no matter how slim, there's a possibility that I might have missed something, right? There's a possibility that you might tell me something that could change my mind. And so going into it, this is probably where we're headed, but let's go through the assumptions here and make sure I'm not missing anything. And most people, especially the ones who are willing to kind of walk through that, they're like, yeah, I can do that. I can have that conversation. Nobody's going to tell me something I don't know, but I can do it. And I will tell you, when I press them, I'm like, because they'll be like, well, but nobody would. And when I press them on, I'm like, okay, but if somebody did, would you change your mind or would you stay where you are? They always are like, well, of course, if really I missed something huge, of course I'd change my mind. Why wouldn't I? Right? Of course I'd go in a different direction. So that's when you tell them, look, that's all you have to say. I don't think anybody's going to raise anything we haven't thought of, but I want you to check my math, right? Check my assumptions. And I'm not sure. I'm not convinced I'm going to get anything out of this process. So-and-so said I should do this, but I'm willing to give it a go, right? So I think when you invite their honesty, you don't ask them to approach it from a non-skeptical lens. Most people are willing to give it a try. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. You go there. No, I can do it. I hold this. Look at this. There are resources. So if you go on to opensource.com, we have a whole bunch of free ebooks you can download, Creative Commons license, but one in particular that might be of interest is the Open Organization Leaders Manual. So what does open leadership look like in the real world? Lots of really good practical stories and examples, not just from Red Hat, but from people inside of other organizations at all different levels. So really good resource. And if you want to know more about the Red Hat multiplier or maybe print it out and show it to somebody else, a version that I have not yet updated, but is pretty darn close to what I showed you today, is available on GitHub. Thank you all very much. Have a good Agile day.